I am a poor trouble monk, and all I have is a spinning wheel, a jailess rice bowl, a tin of goat's milk, 6 shabby yorjas, a towel, and a reputation that is not worth much. Mahatma Gandhi's words as he laid out his belongings to a Marseille customs officer on his way to attend the second round table conference in London in September 1931. When I read this passage in K. Kripalani's The Gandhi Memoirs, I was deeply embarrassed because I felt like I had too much, at least in my current fraction. In fact, when I was first born into this world, I brought nothing with me. When I live long enough and disappear from this earth, I will go empty-handed. As we live, we have come to have our share of things. Of course, we can say that they are things that are useful in our daily lives. However, are they really things that are absolutely essential? The more we look into them, the more we realize that there are quite a few things that we would rather not have. We acquire things out of necessity, but sometimes we feel quite anxious because of those things. So having something means being tied down to something else. When the things we have out of necessity bind us to something else, it means that the main object is converted and we become possessed. Therefore, having a lot of things is often said to be something to be proud of, but it also has the aspect of being entangled in as many things as it is. I had 2 orchids that I cared for carefully, very carefully, until last summer. When I moved to Darrahin 3 years ago, a monk sent them to our room. The only living creatures were me and the orchids. So I read books on the subject and asked friends to bring me fertilizer called hyponicsone to keep them healthy. In the summer, I would move them to the shade to keep them cool, and in the winter, I would turn up the heat more than necessary. If I had shown this kind of devotion to my parents earlier, I would have been called a filial son. As a reward for this pampering, in early spring, it bloomed light green flowers with a delicate fragrance that excited me, and its leaves were always as green as the crescent moon. Everyone who came to visit us at Darrahin was always happy to see the fresh orchids. One day during the rainy season last summer, I went to Bongsun Temple to visit Master Yana. At midday, the sun was shining brightly, and the cicadas in the forest were chirping as loudly as they could, accompanied by the sound of the stream. Oops, it was only then that I suddenly remembered. I had left the orchids in the garden. Suddenly, I began to resent the splendid sunlight that I had seen for the first time. The orchid leaves hanging in the hot sunlight dazzled my eyes, and I could not delay any longer. I hurriedly returned the way I had come. Sure enough, the leaves were drooping. Feeling sorry, I brought some spring water and moistened it, and it finally raised its head. However, it seemed to have lost some of its loveliness. At that time, I felt it with my whole body and mind. Obsession is suffering. Yes, I was too obsessed with orchids. I decided to break free from this obsession. While I was growing orchids, I was stuck and couldn't go out even during the hiking season. Whenever I had to leave the room for a while because I had something to do outside, I had to open the window a little to let in some air. And there were more than a few times when I would leave the orchid pot out and then think about it again and go back and put it back in. It was truly a terrible obsession. A few days later, a friend who was as quiet as an orchid came to visit, so I readily gave him the orchid pot. I was finally free from my bondage. A sense of liberation as if I was flying, even though I had let go of something close to me that I had spent nearly 3 years with. I felt more relieved than sad or empty. From then on, I made a promise to myself that I would throw away 1 thing a day. I guess I learned the meaning of non-possession through orchid. In some ways, human history feels like the history of possession. It seems like we are constantly fighting for a larger share. There is no limit to possession and no holidays. It is just a swaying desire to have as much as possible. They are not satisfied with objects alone, so they try to possess people. If that person does not go their way, they are willing to suffer terrible tragedies. They try to possess others when they are not in their right mind. Possessiveness is directly proportional to interest. This is true not only for individuals, but also for relations between nations. We see many cases where yesterday's allies are now enemies, and countries that used to snarl at each other exchange friendly envoys. It is only because of interests based on ownership. What would happen if human history changed its direction from the history of ownership to the history of non-ownership? There would probably be very little fighting. I have never heard of people fighting because they couldn't give. Gandhi also said, "To me, possession seems like a crime. If he has something, it is only when others who want the same thing can have it. However, since it is almost impossible, he cannot help but feel guilty about his possessions as if they were crimes." Our sense of possession sometimes blinds us. So we become excited without even caring about our own place. However, one day we will return empty-handed. We will leave even our physical body behind and go away empty-handed. Even a great quantity of goods will not help us. There's a saying that only those who throw away much can gain much. This is something to think about for those who are hurt by material possessions. It is the paradox of non-possession that when you have nothing, you can finally have the whole world. In the article Non-Possession contributed by the Monk BeopJeong to modern literature in March 1971,